Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining me this afternoon as we take some time to look at your practice from someone else's point of view. I mean, you know how great your practice is. I'm here to help you see how your practice can stand out to dentists who are either looking to purchase or to come into your practice as an associate. A couple of cleanup items before we get started. This webinar is eligible for CE, and we're going to be following this up with an email to all of the live participants. From that email, there will be a contact person. Apparently, CE is taking just a little bit longer than it used to. So if you don't see something from ADA CE department within, let's say, 3 weeks, there's going to be a contact name on that form, and we're going to ask you to reach out and we can make sure that you get credit for this webinar. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about me before we dive in. And, a little bit about why I'm here. I am a general dentist. I started my practice in Northeast Florida about a year out of my residency program. I grew the practice for 11 years, and unfortunately, I had to sell unexpectedly due to some health concerns. But I really wasn't quite ready to give up on dentistry yet. And I'd been volunteering at a local FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center, for quite some time. I was able to become the dental director at that location and became also an extramural rotation director for the University of Florida. So I got to work a lot with senior dental students. It was a wonderful time for me, and it's also a time when I was able to work with the Florida Dental Association pretty regularly. In fact, I was one of your trustees for a couple of years. And it was actually when I was in one of those meetings as a trustee for the Florida Dental Association that I heard about a program that the ADA was launching. And that program really took into account a number of things that are very important to me. And one of the things that's very important to me is preserving independent practice. I wanted to help our younger docs understand their options coming into practice, and I also wanted to help our owner doctors address some of their needs as they were looking to find buyers and associates for their practices. So, lo and behold, I ended up here in Chicago part-time, although I still have my home in Jacksonville, Florida. You can't get me to give that up, even though right now I am looking at a little bit of gloomy skyscrapers outside the ADA building. Anyway, let's get started on some of the meat of the program. I would encourage you, if you have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A or the chat feature. This is going to be monitored by our team, and we'll be happy to get to all those questions before we finish. And if it becomes apparent that there are a lot of questions, which sometimes happens, we will make sure that we follow this up with a blog post that will be delivered right to your inbox. So keep those questions coming, and let's get started. So what are we going to talk about today? Over the last 3 years of my being with the ADA, I have worked with over 700 dentists who are interested in finding associates and practices to purchase. So I've developed a pretty good sense of what they're looking for. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the top things that a lot of our junior docs are looking for as they come into a practice. And we are going to talk, there's sometimes a little bit of a difference between what the purchasers are looking for and what associates are looking for. So we're going to try to make that distinction for you. We're also going to talk a little bit about some practice metrics that you should be getting into order before you actually list your practice or become involved in a transition. Being more organized is always going to be a good thing. And then finally, my favorite part, which is what can you do today or tomorrow or over the weekend, probably over the weekend, to make your practice take it over the edge, just a little bit extra to make it better, make it show better, essentially. So let's start off with the fun stuff. What are the buyers and the associates looking for in a practice? Okay, here we go. If you're still using the hand developer and you're dipping your x-rays to develop them, that's on the left. No judgment here, but you may want to upgrade your radiographs, all right? If you're using the automatic processor that's found on the right, it is better, all right? That's a good thing. However, I do want to tell you what happened to me when I was at the clinic and working with my senior dental students. Our computer system went down, and all I heard from the students was, "Oh, we're going to have to cancel all the patients. We're going to have to cancel the patients. How can we possibly work without radiographs?" And I said, "Well, we can develop our own." I happened to have in the refrigerator some packages of film. I had Fixer, I had Developer, and of course, I know how to develop a radiograph. Um, to say that they looked at me like I had three heads is a complete understatement. I honestly felt a little bit like a dinosaur. They looked at me like they had no idea what I was talking about, like they had never seen an actual film in their lives. I personally can really appreciate a good, well-developed bite wing radiograph or PA in conventional film. However, our younger doctors in general do want to see some form of digital radiography. And this is one of the almost absolutes that I see, especially from associates coming into a practice. But it's becoming more and more common with my buyers as well. It seems like they equate at least digital radiography or digital intraorals with the ability to be a more high-tech practice. So, right, wrong, or indifferent, if you're clinging to your old x-rays, that's fine, that's great, but just understand that it's going to be a little bit more difficult. You're gonna have to find other ways to make your practice stand out. If you have the ability to upgrade to digital radiography, it's probably not a bad idea because our dentists do expect that. What about the space itself? Okay. Here we go. If your operatories look like this, hey, there's no judgment here. But the docs that are coming in to look at your practice and trying to see if they can see themselves working in the space may not be particularly comfortable with a belt-driven handpiece. Now, okay, I know this is a bit of an extreme, and I understand that, and you understand that as well. The point is how does your operatory show? If your upholstery is torn up, please don't hold it together with duct tape. You can get it refurbished. You can get that reupholstered. It's not that big a deal. Does your chair go up and down? All right. Another quick little story. I was on a mission trip to Haiti and the dental chair decided to stop working. It stopped working in the very top position. Guess what I had to do? I had to jump on a cinder block and do dentistry up on a cinder block. That was for 3 days. My back was killing me. It's no wonder I ended up having problems and had to get out of private practice. But the point is make sure that your space is reflective of the type of work that's offered in the office. Do you have to have electric handpieces? Many of our docs are used to those. They are using them in the schools. Not necessary, okay? But should you have working equipment, your chairs should function properly, and your operatories need to show well. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Do you have to have everything sleek and slick and shiny and new and modern? Not necessarily. No, our docs don't all expect that. Now, if it shows like that, they're going to be more apt to give it a second look very quickly because, again, just like when you're selling your house, A lot of it depends on how it shows. But let's talk about what our buyers and associates are really looking for in the space that's within the office. Our buyers are generally looking for more than 3 operatories. If you have 2 or 3 operatories, although it might work really well for you, a buyer is going to want to know that perhaps they can expand to at least 4 ops. So take a look at the space. If your office is plumbed for 4 and maybe you just haven't built it out, go ahead and get a quote. That way you're prepared to have that conversation up front with a potential buyer. They won't just look at it and say, no, you have 3 operatories and I don't even want to consider your practice. No, it's easier to say, I have 3 that are fully outfitted and fully functional. However, I am plumbed for 4, and this is what it would approximately cost to get it up to speed. If you're looking to bring an associate into your practice, and especially if you're looking to have that associate work alongside you at all, you're going to want more than 5 operatories. They're going to want to know that they have the space to do the work that they need to do, and they're going to want to know that they have the ability to grow within that space. So even if you only can designate 1 op, or the associate comes in and maybe they only want 1 op to start, they're going to want to know that they can eventually go to 2 or maybe even 3 operatories. Now, of course, these are not absolutes. These are just generalizations. If, of course, you're working a split schedule with an associate, it really doesn't matter. You just need to make sure that you have the staffing to go along with it. Make sure that your space is clean. That's an absolute. Make sure that your space is organized. Again, another absolute. And if you're looking to bring in an associate and you want it to be a long-term associate, consider whether you have some space within the office for them to call their own. All right. What we don't necessarily want is for our doctors, our associates, to come into the office and then not have a place where they can kind of get away or decompress after a difficult procedure or a difficult patient. They're going to want to know that they have somewhere where they can go and that they can think and that they can get ready for the next big procedure. So think about those things when you're considering your space. And just as an aside, if you have the tendency to be a hoarder, please, please, please hire somebody to come clean your office out. The reason I bring that up is I actually visited an office about 2.5 years ago, and it was a very large office. I mean, it was 2,700 square feet. Unfortunately, 3 operatories were completely jammed with, the only thing I can say is it was junk. There were papers stacked from floor to ceiling. There was old equipment stuffed back in the corners. Please make sure that you're showing a clean and organized space. There's nothing that's going to make somebody run faster. So what else do your doctors want to see and hear from you when they're talking to you about your opportunity? They want to know that you have some kind of a solid transition plan. Now, what do I mean by that? And why is this important? Okay, let's bring up something that we've all heard about. Many of you may have experienced yourselves, and that is an associate comes into a practice. The owner says, oh, yeah, I want to retire in a couple of years. I'm good. I'm about done with dentistry. Well, 7, 8, 9 years later, that owner is still practicing. That associate is still waiting for ownership. And unfortunately, I'm sure none of you have done it, but it does happen where those owners, or some of them, have actually sold the practice right underneath the associate's feet. Or at the end of 9 years, the owner says, well, if you want to buy the practice, this is how much it is. And the associate now says, wait a minute, I helped to build this practice and now you're going to charge me for it. It puts, it's a bad precedent to set. It's something that the associates don't want. And it's something that really leaves a lot of bad blood and bad feelings between the doctors. And everybody needs to be professional in this. So understand your own timeline, understand your goals, understand what you are trying to get from this, and then write your plan down. Be organized about it, be transparent about it. The more upfront you are about what you want to get from this, the more likely it is that you're going to get exactly what you want, right? So have a plan in place and then follow it. If things have to change for some reason, again, be totally open, be totally upfront. This is often where I see deals fall apart, where there's just not good communication about the goals. So make sure that you have that solid transition plan. Okay, if I were to say the number one thing that our incoming doctors want is a fairly specific location. Our doctors are graduating now in their late 20s, early 30s. Many of them are already married, many have children. They've kind of settled on a very specific location. You cannot do anything about this. You're not going to uproot your practice. It's just not going to happen. This screenshot is representative of the potential buyers and the potential associates that are looking in the state of Florida. As you can see, they're pretty much centered around Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, a couple up there in the Panhandle, up near Pensacola, but the vast majority of our doctors are looking in these areas that's represented by the circles. So what can you do to help to kind of mitigate this? If you have a practice where there is not a dot, is there anything that you can do to help us? All right, to help us sell your area? My answer is yes, there is. We want to know what makes your location or your practice great, right? There are so many wonderful opportunities out there, and we see them all the time. I know they're there. The more you can help us to sell your location, the better it's going to be. So, what are some of the things that stand out at this list to you? What's representative of what your location has to offer? Do you have great schools? Is there construction going on in your area? Oh my goodness, my area is booming like nobody's business. There is so much building going on in the state of Florida that there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to find some kind of construction, something about your town that shows its growth. If you can show that your area is growing, it's going to make these doctors take a second look. Think about how great your community is. What are some of the activities that are available? And is there any opportunity for loan repayment? All right, either through the state or through the National Healthcare Service Corps. Sometimes, especially if you're serving a certain percentage of underserved populations, there will be some potential loan repayment. Now, that needs to be investigated, understood, but there are some resources that the ADA has that we can help you to determine whether there might be a possibility. Again, anything that we can get from you to help us sell your area is only going to help. And this is one of the big initiatives that we have at ADA Practice Transitions is how do we get dentists to really look at these smaller market opportunities. And I think Florida is a great place to start. We've had some success in some of our pilot states, but we want to address access to care issues in Florida because we need to talk about that redistribution of the dentists so that we don't have to think about some of those others coming in and providing dental care to Floridians. So help us to figure this out, right? So let's switch gears just a little bit and get kind of specific about some of the metrics that doctors are looking for in the practices that they're looking to either join or purchase. And again, when we look at these, let's think about them from the point of view of what do these numbers tell a story. So what's the story and how should you be talking about them and representing them to potential associates or to potential buyers? Starting off with the financials. A lot of this stuff is going to be very basic, and you guys are going to get every second of it. And if you need to gloss over it, that's fine. But let's talk about your billable production versus your total production. What's the story there? Well, of course, your total production is what you would get paid if every single person in your practice paid you your fee, your full fee, the one that's in your book, okay? Your billable production is what you're actually allowed to charge your patients. So if there's a big difference between your billable production and your total production, what does that tell? What story does that tell? It means that you're taking a lot of third-party payers. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just something that you need to be aware of, and it's something that our doctors are going to ask about. They're going to look at. So if those numbers are quite a bit different, make sure that you have looked at those fee schedules. Make sure that you understand what that means as far as a new person coming into your practice. Here's a biggie is your collections percentage. Of your billable production, how much do you actually collect? All right. Not your accounts receivables, thing like that. I want to know how much you actually brought in of your billable production versus your collections. All right. So if you're collecting at least 98% of your billable production, nobody's probably going to take a second look at that. They're going to say, great, you've got good policies in place, no problem. If you're under 94%, that's going to be a red flag to doctors coming in. And you're going to have to understand that that is a red flag, and you're going to have an explanation for it. So why not start taking a really close look at that right now, especially if you're looking, and especially if you have a little bit of time before you're planning on making your transition. Why is this important if you're planning on bringing on an associate? Yeah, I'm sure you can understand why this is important if you're looking to sell your practice. But if you're looking to bring on an associate, how do we often pay associates? Okay, I hope there are a lot of you that are thinking, I want to pay them a percentage of the collections because that's what I'm actually getting. So I don't want to pay them any more than that. Well, if you're paying them a percentage of the collections, then they would be very smart to ask about your collections policies, wouldn't they? Do you want a smart dentist to come into your office? My guess is you do. All right. You want somebody who really understands what's going on. And you're going to have to be able to speak to this if your collections percentage shows up pretty low. All right. Same with your overhead. Your overhead is really your expenses versus your production. All right. And there are different categories of your expenses, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. But what is your overhead percentage? How does it fall within the industry standards? Dental practices are generally going to be around 55 to 65%, depending. And if you're way over that, you need to understand why. Buyers, especially, are really going to care about why your overhead is too high. If your overhead is at 20% or 30%, that's also a red flag. Why would that be a red flag? The first thing that I think of is you have absolutely zero you report zero facility costs. All right. You're saying, I own my building. Of course, I own it outright. There's no mortgage. There's no nothing. I don't have to have a facility cost. Yes, you do. You really should have a facility cost as a fixed expense, and that would go into your overhead. So if your overhead shows up way on the low side, my guess is there are going to be some questions that need to be asked to really understand those numbers. If you're not certain of any of these numbers, you need to talk with your accountant, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Do you need to have a practice appraisal, and do you need to know your appraised value? It's always a good idea to have that number and understand what your practice is worth anytime you're looking at making a transition. Do you need a formal third party appraisal? Every time? Maybe, maybe not. If you're looking to bring in an associate, you need to understand exactly what metrics you're going to continue to measure over the next couple of years while that associate is in practice, because you have to be able to measure whether you are achieving your financial goals. I doubt you're bringing in an associate and expecting to lose money. That's not what you want to do. If you're bringing in an associate, you're planning on some practice growth. So know where you stand so that you can measure the growth appropriately. If you're looking to sell your practice within the next year, it's good to go ahead and get that third party appraisal if you don't already have one. Of course, the reason being is that you need some kind of a starting point. And besides that, if you have a third party appraisal, guess what? That's something that that buyer can immediately take to the banks and say, here we go. This is what they know then that they have some documentation to back up that purchase price that they want to offer for your practice. So think about those things and get an appraisal so that you understand the value of your practice. Understand your accounts receivable. All right. If you have a number of accounts that are over 90 days in arrears, you're probably not going to collect it. The banks are really only going to give you 5 cents on the dollar for those. Clean them up. If you're going to send them to collections, send them to collections. If you don't want to send them to collections, fine, write them off. Get them off the books. Clean it up. Don't be like one of the recent dentists that I talked to said she purchased a practice, and lo and behold, she had $1 million sitting on the books. No, she didn't. No, she didn't. They had never once closed out an account. So keep your accounts receivables clean. Again, it shows well, it looks good to buyers. This is what I was talking about when I said understand your numbers and understand where you fall within those KPIs, within the industry benchmarks, okay? The numbers that you see here, I know that they're a little bit fuzzy. This is really for a general dental practice only. And again, they're the industry norms. You can get these from your accountant. They know, they will generally have these numbers. But work with your accountant to identify where do you fall within these categories. Understand what's going on when you fall outside the norms, for instance. And falling outside the norms isn't always a bad thing, okay? Think about it. If your lab fees are running at 15%, 20% even, what does that mean? Okay, it means one of two things probably. It either means your practice is very heavily cross-oriented, or it could mean that, hey, you're paying a lot for your lab fees. So again, it's not a judgment or anything else. All it is it tells a story. What story does your practice tell? What story do these numbers tell? Do you fall within the norm, or are you way outside? So beyond the numbers, beyond the financial numbers, what are some of the other things that you can start to put together and start to think about as far as how am I going to present my practice to a potential buyer or a potential associate? And again, what do these things tell? What story is going along with this? Well, if your treatment wait times are a week, it could mean that your office runs incredibly efficiently. You know exactly where you're going to slip people in, and that's great. That's how you want to practice. If your treatment wait times are 4 to 6 weeks or greater than 6 weeks, you could potentially be losing patients. All right. So that's kind of one of those busyness metrics that we've heard about before. How long does it take for patients to get in to get their treatment? If it's too long and there are other dentists in the area, again, there's the possibility that they are actually going to another dentist to get their treatment done because they just can't wait for you. All right. So think about the story that your treatment wait times tell. What about your hygiene wait time? Most doctors want to come into a practice that has a very robust hygiene program. They want to know that that patients are coming back into the practice and they're coming back for regular care. All right. That's really important. Patient retention is huge. So just understanding what that hygiene schedule looks like and how long it takes the patient to get in for their hygiene visit. Obviously, we really want that to be a bit longer than the treatment wait time because we typically want our hygiene patients to make their appointments when they leave from their last hygiene appointment, right? What is your staff turnover? Again, it tells a story. It tells a story about you. It tells a story about the practice. If the staff is satisfied and happy with the practice, they're not going to be leaving very quickly. So the more longstanding your staff is, sometimes that's going to present a little bit better picture to a potential buyer or a potential associate. New patients per month is one that I always get a little bit stuck on because the industry benchmark might be 20 to 24, but let's face it, your new patients per month are entirely dependent on your particular practice style. If your practice is one that spends an hour and a half to 2 hours on every single new patient appointment, your new patients per month are probably going to be pretty low. And that just makes sense. You're more relationship based, you're spending more time with your patients, you probably have longer appointments generally, and you perhaps are working out a fewer opportunities. If, on the other hand, you have a very highly productive, I'm not even going to say productive, high volume practice where you're relying on getting a lot of patients in and out very, very efficiently and probably having your hygienist and your assistants do quite a bit of the prep work, then you are going to have perhaps more than the 24 new patients a month, which is the industry standard. So that one, you just want to show that you have consistent numbers and that they are growing as much as you want them to grow. Make sure you understand what your procedure mix is and why do you need to do this. All right. You either need to identify a lacking area where you would want to bring an associate in to fill an identified need. Or if you're looking to sell your practice, you obviously want to be able to show the potential buyer what they need, what skill set they need to have in order to maintain the production that's currently going on in the office. For example, if your office is 40% IV sedation and you are making quite a bit of your production off of IV sedation, a new doctor coming in is going to have that skill set. On the other hand, if you're referring out all of your surgery and you really want a general dentist who's going to come in and take over that part of the practice, then you want to identify that, yes, we need to, we don't do this particular procedure and we want to find somebody specifically who can do this kind of procedure. So understanding what your practice needs is really important. And you can do that by understanding your procedure mix. A production report is a wonderful thing. Do you lease your space or do you own your space? We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Is there an opportunity to grow the space itself? And is there an opportunity to expand the services that are offered in the practice? Again, this goes back to understanding your procedure mix and understanding what your goals are for your transition. The biggie here on the practice specs is really, are you in a growth mode? Are you stagnant? Or are you declining? If you're in a growth mode, and especially if you've been in a growth mode for 3 to 5 years, okay, let's take 2020 and kind of take it out of the picture. Most of you have recovered pretty well. Florida's recovered fairly well from the pandemic. However, we know that 2020, most doctors took a pretty big hit. So the banks are taking that into consideration, and so are the valuators. All right. So if you are in growth mode and you can kind of show that, year over year, you're going to be more attractive to buyers. It just goes without saying. If you're stagnant, not the worst case scenario, just identify if there are areas where you can grow and grow at the rate that you want to. If you are showing a steady decline in productivity, collections, new patients, guess what? Your practice might be wonderful and there could have all the potential in the world, but the probability of you getting top dollar for your practice, if you're showing this decline year over year, it's just not going to happen. All right. You have to understand that the doctors coming into the practice are going to mostly rely on financing in order to purchase your practice. If you're showing steady decline, it's going to be a huge red flag to the banks, and they will not do 100% financing for that. And I don't know whether you want to get in the position of trying to do some seller financing. That always gets a little bit crazy. And quite frankly, the potential buyers there are going to try to find a practice that's showing growth because it's a lot less risky for them. And this is a scary time for them. So let's switch gears and talk about things that are a little bit more proactive. What can you do right now to make your practice more appealing or kind of show just that little bit better to those buyers and to those potential associates? Let's be easy here. Do the easy stuff first. All right. A coat of paint is a wonderful thing. Sherwin-Williams is your friend. All right. It's so easy. It's inexpensive. If you have dark paneling on the walls, you know what? A coat of white paint makes it look fresh and new. Okay. If you have peeling wallpaper on the walls, I beg of you, I beg you, please take it off. From somebody who's taken off a lot of wallpaper in her day, it's not that hard. You can do it. You can hire somebody to do it. Get rid of the wallpaper, either freshen it up or cover it with a coat of paint. Declutter. Again, it kind of goes without saying. If your practice shows well, buyers and associates are going to look at it a little bit differently. So take all those personal effects out of the office. If you have a sailfish, sitting right there in your waiting room, and especially if it has dust on it, dust bunnies are no fun. Let's get rid of that stuff. Let's freshen it up. Let's make it look fresh and clean. Let's organize everything. If you recognized yourself when I talked about being a hoarder, all right, I'm talking to you right now. Let's make sure that you hire somebody to come in and organize everything. Go ahead and throw some things out. Get rid of the clutter. Organize, 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 organize. What about maintenance? All right. If your compressor is getting ready to blow and you're holding it together with duct tape and chicken wire, I encourage you to go ahead and please just replace it. I mean, really, it's fine. I know I was in public health. I had to do a lot of my own maintenance. I had to make things work. And especially if a chair was about to go down, I'd be on the floor picking up uncovering pretty much everything just to see if there was a loose wire that I could reconnect. Anything I could do to keep that chair functional. But you should not be doing that if you're looking to sell your practice or you're looking to bring in an associate. They don't want to see that. Let's not do that. Let's fix things the way they need to be fixed. If it's necessary to upgrade equipment at this point, please go ahead and do it. Next thing you can do right now, it's going to make your practice look a lot more appealing to potential buyers, especially, is get your documents in order. Talk to your accountant. Take a look and find your lease if you lease your space. Make sure that you have your employee policies and procedures manuals available, open, Make sure that you have your compliance manuals up to date. Know your number of active and inactive patients. And when we say an active patient, understand what that means. All right. An active patient is one that's come to your office within X number of months. And what you would want to do is when you say active patients, you would specify patients that have been to my practice in the last 6, 9, 12, 18, 24 months, whatever it is that you choose to designate as your active patient list. Make sure that you note that. This particular list, as well as another one, will be going out to everybody on this webinar, along with that information about the CE. So you don't have to copy this. This will be coming to you. The key is get your documents together. This is one of the big reasons that I have seen practice sales fall apart. Okay, believe it or not, this is the reason. I've had doctors, owners who got the documentation to the potential buyer too slow. It was inaccurate. It was unorganized. And guess what? The buyer said, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want to get involved with this, because if this owner can't even get this stuff together at the beginning when they know they want to sell their practice, what am I going to find when I come in and look under the floorboards? I don't want to do it. So I've seen deals fall apart simply because the owners didn't have their documents in order. So get this stuff in order and get it in order quickly. But what about beyond the financials? What else will potential buyers and potential associates be looking for? They're going to want to see what the clinical quality in the practice is. And how do you potentially show this? Well, sit down, open some charts. When somebody comes into your office and you've exchanged an NDA and you're really looking at having them come into that practice, don't be afraid to open a chart. Don't be afraid to show them hygiene charts, preferably one with patients who have been longtime patients that you've done quite a bit of work on. They might as well know what they're getting into. Okay, I'm going to try to not go too far off, but quick little story. A couple of weeks ago, if this person is on this webinar, I'm just going to crack up. I always thought, you want to know that the quality is really good in the practice that you're going to purchase, right? This particular doctor said, no, 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 absolutely not. I want you to find me a practice that has does not have high quality, that has a ton of work that needs to be done or a ton of work that needs to be redone. I said, you're nuts. Why would you want to step into something like that? There's going to be there's going to be a problem with the patients. You're going to, went into all this other stuff. He said, no. He said, I want to be the one who saves them. I want to be the one who has a lot of work to do when I step into an office. I said, well, you know what? You made my point for me, because I said that every potential buyer should be evaluating the clinical quality. I just was not thinking about it in those terms, but he made my point for me, just not the same point that I was thinking at the time. Look at the schedule, not just today's schedule, not just tomorrow's schedule, but be ready to show a schedule from about 3 or 4 months back, and preferably for about a week. Again, quick little story. We had a doctor who thought that she had looked at the schedule. Yeah, looks plenty busy. Didn't look closely enough to understand that that owner had actually been spending 6 2-hour appointments per single unit crown. Literally, it would take 6 months for this particular owner to finish one single unit crown. Schedule looked really busy, but the buyer there didn't take a deep enough dive into the schedule to understand what it really was telling, what story it was telling. Again, we've already talked about the collections policies. Make sure that your compliance stuff is up to date and all of your manuals are up to date. If you have any questions about those, you can always go to ada.org. There are a number of manuals that are out there to make sure that you can kind of check the boxes. Make sure that that your radiation certificates are up to date. Make sure that your office is compliant with all federal, local, and state regulations. And have your employee manuals ready to go. Okay, You're looking to sell your practice. You're doing fine. You're bringing home exactly what you want to bring home. You are happy going to work each day and you don't want to cause any waves. You just want to continue to practice and then you want to sell the practice and get out. Do you really want to go through the exercise of evaluating and updating your fee schedule, understanding that that's going to probably create some tension between yourself and your staff and yourself and your patients? My answer to you is yes, you should. You absolutely should. You should be taking a look at those fee schedules. You can always get this survey of dental fees. It's free to members of the American Dental Association. You want to do this now. Your patients are going to accept it more from you than they will from a doctor coming into your practice, especially if you're looking to sell. But it also applies if you're looking to bring in an associate. I mean, think about it. You bring a new person in, they want to get paid a fair wage. They want to get paid a nice salary. If they come in and immediately feel like they have to update the fee schedule to reflect the quality of care that's delivered in the office, that's going to create a real problem for the patients and it's potentially for the staff as well, because they're going to say, whoa, 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 Dr. Greedy just came in. He sold the practice, he's just bought the practice. Now he's got to pay it off. So he's raised my fees. Wouldn't that be better coming from you as the owner? Come on. So take a look and update your fee schedule. Do you need to update your radiographs to CBCT? Do you need to go paperless? All right. My answer to you is it depends. All right. Actually, in both of those cases, this particular answer is probably no, you probably don't need to do that. What you do need to do is take a really good look at the systems that you already have in place and say, in order to get to the standard of care that I am representing in my office and that somebody else coming in is going to want, do I need to update these systems? If I do need to update the systems, what's the ROI? The reality of it is any equipment that you purchase is going to contribute to about 20% of your total purchase price. Your patients are your biggest asset. The treatment that's rendered in your office is what your practice is really based on. Okay, so it's not probably worth going out and spending $100,000 or $200,000 on various pieces of equipment or toys unless you need those in order to provide the standard of care that you're looking to provide in your office. Should you have digital radiography? Probably. Do you need to have a CBCT? Probably not. Do you or should you have some kind of electronic scheduling system? Probably. Should you or do you need to have a fully paperless office? Not necessarily. So weigh the pros and cons always and decide for yourself what really makes sense for you. It could be that you choose to do nothing and you just take the hit on the purchase price and say, hey, you upgrade it to however you want, but I've got a great practice with wonderful systems and great collections policies. I would personally rather have a really well-run practice and I can get my own bells and whistles. All right. What about the real estate? Do you own your practice? If you own your practice, make the decision on whether you want to sell the real estate. The real estate transaction and the practice purchase transaction are two different transactions, okay? One is selling your business, the other is selling the real estate. Sometimes they're sometimes handled simultaneously, but sometimes they're not. So go get a broker opinion of value on your real estate and get a business valuation for your business. Make the decision on whether you want to be a landlord or not. Is that something that's important to you? Do you want to maintain that real estate? If you do, if you own the building and you want to become a landlord, understand what that means. Know what that means for your state. What are the regulations that go into being a landlord? All right. If you are leasing your space, find out, do some research. Are you at market rate? Are you above market rate? Are you below market rate? If you're below market rate on your lease, wonderful, great. do you have a long-term lease in place, and is it transferable to a new owner? It doesn't do somebody any good to purchase a practice if they're going to get kicked out in the next couple of months because their lease expired. So think about these things now and understand what your particular situation, how that's going to affect your potential sale. Okay. All right, here's a controversial one. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on. However, do you want to be that owner who sells the practice, comes into the office on Monday morning with the new owner and says, "Hi, everybody. I just sold the practice yesterday. Here's your new employer." And I'm not exaggerating. I've heard that story multiple times. I've seen the tears. It's not a great situation. I hear all the time, I need to keep this confidential from my staff and my patients because they're all going to leave. It's kind of the accepted way of looking at this, right? My feeling is, wouldn't that staff be more engaged, especially if you are in your 70s, you're in your late 60s? Your staff probably knows that you're eventually going to retire, and won't they be more engaged and happier if they have a hand in helping to choose your successor? What's going to happen if your patients find out that you're potentially going to retire in the next 6 months? How many of your patients are going to say, "Gosh, doc, we better get this work done. We better get it done quick because I want you to do it. I trust you." There's a lot of controversy here, and I'm never going to tell somebody that what they should and shouldn't do. What I do ask is that you think about it, and think about it from your staff's point of view. Think about it from the patient's point of view, not just what you've been told. All right. So, again, don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. We have some blog posts on it if you want some additional information. Make sure that you have a plan in place. Understand what your options are. For some of you, you might be better off and happier to not even bother with any of this stuff and say, "You know what, I'm just going to practice for a couple more years and close my doors." That's a transition path that's perfectly acceptable. Make sure that you understand the ramifications of it. There are a number of different options. You can bring in an associate for a couple of years. There are associate to ownership paths. I'm just going to sell it. I'm going to, I can't say retire and move to Florida. I can say, retire and move to where are you going to go? I mean, Florida's fabulous. You're going to go to Minnesota? Probably not. But if you're planning on staying in your town, think about what happens if you sell your practice, if you plan on staying in your house. All right. What's going to happen when you run into your patients at the grocery store? All right. You don't want them saying things like, "Why'd you sell to that other doctor? I don't understand. They don't treat me the same way you did." So that leads us kind of into just quickly, I would like to talk a bit about ADA practice transitions because that's really where we shine. All right. We're committed to a couple of primary goals here at ADAPT. We want to provide our ADA member docs with the service that they actually want and need. And we also really want to preserve independent practice by working exclusively with dentists. We only work with dentists, and we want to keep that private practice model alive and well. So a brief explanation of what ADA Practice Transitions is. We are a digital matching service that brings together associates and buyers for dental practices. We have often been equated to the Match.com for dentists, but I'm going to challenge that because we're just not looking for a doctor to join your practice or purchase it. We're looking for just the right person. And we do this by matching our dentists based on how they approach their patients, their staff, and their communities. And in other words, we want to find doctors with compatible philosophies of care. The reality of it is, if we know that if you have two doctors who share commonality in the way they approach dentistry and they approach their patients, their staff, and their communities, the patients are going to be more comfortable. The staff's going to be more comfortable. The patients are going to keep coming back, and everybody's going to be happy because happy patients coming back to the office make for a successful transition for everybody. How does it work? You start off with an online profile that you complete. We ask a lot of questions, things that you might not expect. We want to know exactly who you are. We want to know exactly what you're looking for. We help you to understand how to evaluate these profiles to make sure that you're finding people who fit your criteria. And then we're going to go the extra mile to help make sure that you are compatible and that we give you the tools that you need to complete that transaction, whether it be an LOI template or an associate contracting toolkit that you can use and take to the lawyers to fabricate the final documentation. We can help walk your buyer through the due diligence phase, which is where we say you're looking under the floorboards. You're going to find out whether that practice is really everything that was represented, that you represented it to be. And again, you can take the LOI and due diligence checklist to the lawyers, and they will craft a wonderful APA that is in compliance with all of your state and local and national legalities, because we want our doctors to be successful. All right. So that brings us to the end of this program. I am Dr. Suzanne Ebert. I'm a general dentist. I love talking to general dentists. I would appreciate it if you would have any questions. I ran a bit over. I am going to turn this over to Tyler if there are any questions that I can immediately answer. But I'm always happy to have you reach out to me by email. That's eberts@ada.org, and make sure that you are looking for content to come from us. Everybody on this webinar will be receiving some checklists and emails from us. Tyler?
Great. Thank you, Dr. Ebert. So we have one question in the Q&A right now. It is, what do you suggest when your child is purchasing your practice and has no money, $350,000 of student debt? Do you give it away and stay on, or do you do a consultant agreement or work out a handshake for later when he can afford something?
Okay, a couple of different things there that came to light. Number one, just because it's your child that's purchasing your practice does not mean that you should not have contracts in place. If that child has been out in the workforce for at least 6 months, they have the ability to obtain some form of financing. One way or the other, you need a contract. I would actually suggest going ahead and having that child, if you can tolerate it, come in as an associate, go through the exercise of a full employee associate contract. You may never have to look at that again, but what a nice thing to have in the drawer, okay? You may never see it. You may never have to look at it, but at least the two of you will have sat down. You'll have looked at all of the different scenarios. You will have come to an agreement on timelines. You'll have come to an agreement on when is this doctor going to purchase this practice so that you don't get stuck with it. Okay, you don't want to get stuck with this practice. You're ready to get out probably. So make sure that you have contracts. Never skip that step. I don't care if it's your child. In fact, maybe it's more important if it's your child. All right, so if the child has the ability to finance the practice now, even if they have $350,000 in debt, it is possible. So that child needs to immediately go to the banks, and that child needs to find out what their credit score is. They need to find out what they are going to need to do and what timeline they can expect to be able to purchase that practice. All right. If you're okay to give it away and that's what you want to do, that's your choice. I think it's probably a better choice to take a look at it and decide what a fair value is right now. And again, based on your child's credit scores and their ability to finance, you can go ahead and determine a time frame that the two of you can be held to. Again, I cannot say this often enough. Have a contract, even if you never look at it again. Take the time, because if you can't talk about these things up front, then it's not going to be a good, solid transition for either one of you. Okay. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. Tyler, if there are any other questions, I suggest that we send those out with the rest of the materials that we are planning on giving to this lovely group. And with that happy note, I am going to say goodnight to everybody. And again, thank you so much for joining us this evening.